It's called Matzah Mishugas. And I got to give you a little background for those of you who aren't Jewish so that you understand the story. So even though the stories in this book are about Passover, I try to write things that are accessible for everybody, but you need a little bit of understanding. So during Passover, Jewish people are not supposed to have things that rose. The story goes that when they were fleeing from Egypt, they had to leave so quickly that their bread didn't have time to rise. And so they ate flat bread. And so the tradition became, it was actually a law that became that you're not supposed to eat leavened bread, things that rise. So no cakes, no cookies, no bread, none of that stuff. And instead they have matzah. And for those of you who don't know what matzah is like a flat cracker with no salt and nothing else. It's just flour and water baked really hot so it can't rise. It's very, 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 very boring after a week, because Passover lasts a week. And after a week of eating no bread and matzah, you get really tired of it. And this is a story about that. This is called The Last Temptation of Rabbi Kibbitz. A rabbi, if you don't know, he's a wise man. He's a teacher. He's kind of like the priest, but a little different. It was the 7th day of Passover, and Rabbi Kibbitz was proud that he hadn't thought of chometz. Chometz is another word for leavened bread. He hadn't thought of chometz in 8 days. It was the first time in his life that he hadn't spent every waking hour obsessing about all the foods he couldn't eat. To celebrate, he'd walked to Smyrna, the next village over, to visit his friend Rabbi Sarnoff and borrow a book. After tea and matzah, the senior rabbi of Chelm had taken his leave and his book and begun reading as he walked home. Now, Smyrna is a huge town, and with his nose in his book, Rabbi Kibbitz soon found himself lost. He looked up, and he saw he was in front of a shop and figured he should go in and ask for directions. He turned a page, opened the door, and was already at the counter when he realized he had made a huge mistake. On the 7th day of Passover, Rabbi Kibbitz of Chelm found himself standing in the middle of a bakery, full to the brim with fresh goods. It smelled so delicious. He was about to turn and run when a large man stepped from the back room and introduced himself in a booming voice. Hiya! I'm Joe the Baker. My name is my profession. I'm from America. I travel the world collecting recipes and sharing my knowledge. Everywhere I go, I open a shop for a few months, learn something new, and then move on. This is a beautiful town here, but it's strange. I haven't had a customer all week. What can I get you? Rabbi Kibbitz tried to be polite. He smiled. He was afraid that if he opened his mouth, he would begin to drool. May I make a suggestion? Joe said. I have here a Brooklyn chocolate cake. It's 7 layers of chocolate cake with a buttercream frosting covered with a light chocolate ganache. I'll cut you a slice. It was the most beautiful cake the wise man had ever seen. Sputtered Rabbi Kibbitz. No cake? The baker shrugged. All right, what about this? I got a blueberry pie with a chicken schmaltz crust. That's something I learned here. Instead of blueberries, since they're out of season, I found this delicious sweet squash. Can I cut you a slice? Rabbi Kibbitz stuttered. Well, how about an Italian cannoli? The baker persisted. It's basically sweet ricotta cheese in a crisp tube. I learned the recipe in Florence. Or if not that, I have a Linzer tort from Vienna. It's sort of an Austrian shortbread filled with raspberry jam and sprinkled with powdered sugar. Or, I know, a Hungarian mocha layer cake with rum cream filling topped with a dollop of Welfen pudding, which is a sweet vanilla custard thickened with cornstarch. At the mention of each new delight, Rabbi Kibbitz thought a moment and then shook his head fiercely. Strawberry chocolate crème bouche from Bordeaux, France. That's a cream puff pastry filled with chocolate and caramel and a little bit of red wine drizzled with molten chocolate. Or, A cinnamon babka recipe that I learned here in Smyrna. It's absolutely heavenly. Wait, Joe shouted. I know. Toll House cookies from Whitman, Massachusetts. A butter cookie with huge chunks of chocolate chips. They're just about done. I can bring you warm from the oven. Maybe you'll have them with a little bit of milk. The rabbi groaned. Joe said, scratching his head. Maybe you don't like sweets. No problem. What about some bread? The rabbi felt weak and clutched the counter for support. Joe persisted. He reached up on a shelf and brought down an enormous, round, flour-dusted loaf of bread with a square pattern cut into the top of its crust. I call this Italian paisano. I baked it from a sourdough I kept alive all the way from San Francisco. Take it home. Cut the slices thick. It's perfect for dipping after a dinner of pasta and gravy, which is a kind of sauce. Rabbi Kibbitz looked at the loaf, which was close enough to touch, but Joe didn't stop there. He grabbed a long, skinny stick of bread and began waving it in the rabbi's face. This is a Parisian French baguette. It's light with a crisp crust and snowy insides. Cut it lengthwise and serve it with cheese. Or, I have this wonderful German black bread, dark as night, thick as a leg of lamb. With that, he gestured towards a huge lump of what Rabbi Kibbitz at first took to be a small boulder. I've heard that the Germans smear it with schmaltzy chicken fat, which to me is kind of disgusting. Joe DeBaker shuddered. Rabbi Kibbitz, however, couldn't help himself. He felt a dribble of drool seep out of his mouth and drip down his chin. Oh, you know what? Joe said with a wide grin. I just learned how to tie these things. He reached into a basket and pulled out a huge Bavarian pretzel. Big pieces of salt fell from it. I think I have some spicy mustard somewhere under the counter. Gah! Rabbi Kibbitz said. He felt as if his knees were buckling under him. What about a Polish rye bread? It's dark and light swirl with lots of caraway seeds. I have some fresh made butter that we can smear on it. Wait! I know. I finally figured it out. Rabbi Kibbitz was startled by the sudden interruption. He stared at Joe, wondering what might possibly come next. You're Jewish, Joe said with a glimmer of hope twinkling in his eye. This is great. Just last week, I got one of the bakers in Smyrna to show me how to make this. He reached under the counter and lifted up a perfectly formed 6-braided challah. This is an egg bread, right? You guys love these things for the holidays and Friday nights. This is one of the world's best challah recipe. And I got 3 dozen of them sitting around. I can't understand why nobody's buying them. Rabbi Kibbitz said, stumbling back. He barely had a hold of his book as he ran out of the shop. What did I say? Joe muttered to himself. Maybe he's got one of those newfangled wheat allergies. I don't know. It's so much easier in Manhattan. At least there they know how to make bagels. Rabbi Kibbitz ran all the way back to Chelm. By the time he arrived at his house, it was getting dark. You're late, his wife said as he panted his way into the kitchen and collapsed at the table. She handed him a glass of water. Are you hungry? He couldn't speak, but he nodded his head as he drank the water. What would you like? She asked. What would I like to eat? He replied softly. It's a simple question, she said. Me, the rabbi said, his voice slowly rising to a fever pitch. I'd like cake. I'd like pie. I'd like cookies. I'd like strudel. I want bread. I want rolls. I want pretzels. I want challah with schmaltz. Lots and lots and lots and lots of it. It's still Passover, his wife said. I know, he said, rising to his feet, almost shouting. I don't care. I want it all. I want it with butter and schmaltz. I want it dipped in gravy. I want it plain. I want it now. All we have is matzah, she said. The rabbi sighed. He collapsed in his chair. He shrugged. All right, I'll have some matzah. She set a piece on the table and jumped back as he snatched it off the plate. Be careful, you don't eat my fingers. You want some chopped liver? His mouth was full of dry, tasteless crumbs. Rabbi Kibbitz nodded. He closed his eyes and dreamed of speed reading his way through the book so he could return it to Smyrna in only 2 more days. The end. Thanks for